Hello, Mercedes, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming in, my friend. Totally appreciate you. Super excited for this chat and hopefully many more to come. I am going to go ahead and hit record and just want to say, well, again, thank you for coming and thank you for the listeners for joining again here. I have my friend Mercedes Swan, who is here. I got HR in the building, y'all. Everybody chill. I'm just kidding. But we are going to talk about some really cool things tonight and talk about something cool that Mercedes is working on to help a lot of people, particularly for the women of color that are going to be listening. I would love for you guys to tune in. And then for you, Mercedes, just to give you some background on me, I really connect with a lot of the things that you were doing, mainly because I'm married to a woman of color, and she's gone through the whole like work burnout. She's gone through like feeling attacked, feeling like there's strategic planning against her. She's gone through toxic colleagues who have tried to call her out or make her look bad intentionally. She's gone through a very interesting masked PIP. Like it wasn't laid out to her as a PIP. It was laid out as like, hey, so she actually took a medical leave for mental health to like cool off. So she found like, oh, like I can take out medical leave instead of taking PTO or quitting. She took leave. When she came back, they were like, oh, welcome back. By the way, we'd love to like have a plan together to kind of ramp you up. And then things started to get documented, and I don't think she picked up on what was going on, but I think it was really like a pip, but they'd kind of phrase it as like, hey, we're here to help you kind of get reacclimated. And then I want to say probably like 2 months after that, they like let her go. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and she was a little heartbroken by it, by how things went. And I feel like for people, this applies to everybody, but because my wife is a woman of color, I'm just referring back to her. I feel like this happens a lot, and it's also not talked about a lot. So I'm hoping that at some point we'll be able to unpack that. But I wanted to pause for a second, give the audience a chance to know who you are. And for the audience that's listening again, we're going to talk about something that Mercedes is working on called Bliss, which I'm hoping that she educates everybody well on it, and that folks have a chance to reach out to her for guidance or reach out to her on how to use her products. Mercedes, can we just talk about like your background a little bit? Maybe we don't have to go all the way back to like birth, unless you want to.
I do want to do that. Yeah, I would like you to know exactly where I was
Yeah,
born,
let's do it.
the situation in which, no. Yeah, so I was born in Orlando, and shortly after that, I moved to Gainesville because I went to college, and that's where I started my HR career. So we'll fast forward through
Did you
that.
go to University of Florida?
I did go to the University of Florida. Go Gators! I hope that's safe to say
It,
here. Sorry
it's
for you,
it's
maybe
cool.
not.
I mean, we're beyond the early 2000s, so we're good.
I mean, maybe we're not. It's okay. Because, like, the way I feel about it, I'm a Gator forever.
Okay.
Okay. But that's okay. Okay. I'll leave you alone. But yeah, so I'm a Gator. And in that process, I discovered human resources. I was actually really in love with psychology, and I found HR kind of going through coursework in psychology. And so I actually, decided to get my master's in management, did a focus in human resources, got my internship, did all the things, and launched my HR career. And that actually led me to kind of growing and developing in understanding some of the dynamics that you mentioned that are going on with your wife. So outside of my 9 to 5, right, in HR, right, I actually started to build a coaching practice that really now in its full, I guess, fully realized form, that really shows up to serve Black women. And I think that there is a lot of dynamics that we have that others do not, right? So I learned about a lot of those challenges, inequities, misogynoir, and how it looks differently for how Black women navigate. Of course, there are other dynamics for other people of color, women of color, right? And how that shows up, right? We all have kind of different, we have different identities, and that's kind of and as a result we have different experiences,
Hmm.
right, which is the basis of intersectionality, right? So in that journey of experiencing it myself and working with Black women and understanding what that looks like, I actually began to do work in my HR world, to basically diversify the workforce, like identify inequities, create a more inclusive workplace. And as a result, over time, I really began to love DEI more than I loved HR, and then I moved into DEI. So that's kind of
Okay.
my journey in short, and how I kind of became a career coach for Black women and the dynamics of that, which I know will, based on your experience, that is unfortunately a very common experience, and it's unfortunate how common it
Mm.
is. And so those are some of the dynamics that I talk about a lot with Black women in navigation.
That's awesome. So I have some, so also for me, I work in tech. I'm a product leader. I have hired women. For me, I have worked for women and I have hired women. I have never worked for women of color, but I have worked for women and I've hired women of color. And for me, I guess it's never really been about the fate. It's all about like the attributes, what you bring, and all of the other things that you
Mm-hmm.
bring. In my opinion, when you remove the face and you really talk to the person, I feel like women can, and at least in my space, women have an edge, in my opinion. And they have an
Mm-hmm.
edge because there is a natural ability to think three steps ahead. There is a natural ability to like protect, not necessarily like physically protect, but to think about insurance, think about like the what ifs. That is so natural, and they have such a good intuition that, in my opinion, I feel like in a lot of these roles, women are just a natural like fit, and I don't understand why it's so challenging. But before I go down that path, you mentioned DEI, so I wanted to get some tea out there for a second for the listeners. You know how you're filling out an application, and at the very end, they give you the optional section where you can select your ethnicity and you can select your if you're a male or female. Okay, does that matter? Does it help? Is it just kind of eliminated and goes into like a counter somewhere? So at least we're just counting, or is someone actually looking at it and say, "Ooh, I got one."
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of dynamics to think about. And I do really want to talk about your conversation about hiring women
Yes,
too, because
yes,
I think there's a lot to
yes,
unpack
yes.
there. So I'll start with what your question is, right? So the reason that those questions are asked are for legal compliance, right? So I think a lot of times people think that those questions are being asked because HR wants to, like, yes, we benefit if we're using it the right way to make sure that we are equitably hiring. But it's not just because HR wanted to ask those questions. Like, there are legal requirements, whether that's reporting because you're a federal
Mm,
contractor, or whether you have to report because you're in litigation. There are real reasons that you have to report, that you have to collect and report on that information. Some of them are, well, I mean, lots of them are even tied to veterans and like the protections for veterans, right? So some of these things are really well-meaning reasons as to why we should collect this information.
mm,
The other side of that is that people are like, well, I feel like as soon as I click that I'm white or any other race, right, or I click that I'm a male, I get through a system. So they must be vetting or screening me that way, right? Most HR systems, right, to get a little bit nerdy for you, like like a manager or a recruiter doesn't have access to that information like 90% of the time, because of the legal challenges that can happen when somebody is making decisions based on what we call protected classes, which is the information that's collected at that stage, right? And so most of the time that's locked down in a system. That's a report that some systems admin has access to when they have to do EEOC reporting, or they have to, present to the board our demographics, those types of
got
things.
it.
Or somebody who's in a high level administrative role is doing to make sure that we're not creating what is called adverse impact to certain individuals, right? So there could be practices that we are doing, right? So if we find that maybe we don't have a representative amount of individuals who are applying that have a disability, maybe there's something in our application process that's actually excluding them,
Mm,
right? So there are good ways that data can be used. Now, let's be honest here, right? People don't always do good things. So are there HR teams that may be screening? They can access that information. It's not locked down the way that it should be from HR best practices, and they are making screening decisions for that. I am sure that there are employers out there that are doing that. But in terms of HR best practices, no, that is not something that a hiring manager or even a recruiter should be seeing. Now, are there indicators of race and gender on a resume that might
Yes.
be indicating
Yes.
that? Absolutely. And that could result in the very same exact thing as actually seeing on a report on a paper that
Mm.
identifies who people are, which is, I think, getting into some of the conversation that you were saying about, how does that show up in like evaluating women and their ability to do a job, and how those biases are laid into a resume, and why we may choose to screen out certain people based on their identity. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. So, in other words, I can just go back to being a black male. I don't have to be a white male.
Let me put it this way. If somebody, sorry, if we're being specific here, if you are going to look at my application and say, I think that's a black woman, I'm going to screen them out. Thank you. Thank you for doing that,
Ooh.
because that's not a place I want to work. Yeah.
Mm.
So please
They're
do.
doing you a
Please see that
favor.
I'm a black woman and screen me out. They're doing me a
Got
favor.
you.
You don't deserve all of the talents and the gifts and the great things that I would do for your organization because it's in a certain body. So thank
Mm.
you. Thank you for doing me a service. And thank you for not allowing me to waste my talents at your organization.
Beautiful. Snaps for you.
A little petty there. I'm a
No,
little
no, I love
petty.
it. I love it. I love it. And now, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around fast. There's just so much I want to like
You're good.
unpack. Well, now let's go back to the point I was making earlier about hiring. Working for women. So I've worked for women. I have worked with women. I've hired women. Women have an interesting dynamic. But let me start with the hiring of women. Whenever I get a resume, I don't even look at the name. It's just because my eyes are just that has like the least amount of value to me. Like when I'm looking at a resume, and I'm not trying to sound like cliche or anything like that, but that's true. Like as soon as I get it, I'm like, and then I'll go back to the name, the top, just to say, okay, who is this person? And my biggest thing is, can I pronounce their name? Like that's the biggest thing is, can I pronounce her name? And I just want to see like the summary. And then half the time, I'm looking through the rest, I'm like, ooh, okay, cool. And then I go back to the name, and then I'll see it's either a female's name or a male's name. But it doesn't. When I'm thinking about like the whole like interview journey, nothing about it says, "Oh, it's a guy. He's gonna come crush it," or he's a black male. I want to hire him, or he's a white male. I want to hire him, or is it like none of that matters to me
Mm-hmm.
because I just see you as a person, right? So, however, when when I've hired women, I'm telling like, and I've hired men, and I've had situations where I've seen her literally like save my butt, like I've had people direct reports who have like you need to know this and you need to know this and you need to know this. So there's like a sense of like wanting to protect it, like your group, right? And your leader.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas males will do it, but not to the extent of women, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope the internet don't beat me up. I'm just keeping it real.
We're gonna talk about it. I'm gonna keep it real with you too. So yeah, let's talk
But
about it.
I've also noticed that women have a keen ability, and this is the part that frustrates me about like resumes and everything like that. There are so many like non-tangible assets that I find in women that you may not see on a resume, but you have to do through conversation and give them scenarios and see what their thought process is. And sometimes I don't feel like during the hiring process, women are given that opportunity or people have that thought to say, hey, let me see what her thinking is. On the flip side of that, I noticed also during the hiring process that women are more critical of women than they are of men. I have seen like the nitpickiness when a female candidate comes to the table. If I'm doing like a panel interview with someone else, she's like, well, I'm like, what? You dug deep for that one, didn't you? I'm sorry, she doesn't walk on water, but she's a hell of a candidate. So there's a
Yeah.
weird like I don't know competition thing where it comes women to women, but just working with women in general, I feel like they don't get the same opportunities that males get, and I think there's something wrong with that. I think that it doesn't make sense to me. I feel like I'm not even I'm taking the gender off the table. Women can do the same that men can do, and many times they can outperform us in certain scenarios too. So I say all that because it's a problem. And I don't know how to fix it, but I hope that people are thinking about it and wanting to fix it, because we need women in the work. I'm telling you, like, if you are a hiring manager and you need like an A1 to like cover you, because you can't walk on water. Listen, managers are not perfect. They make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. But having a direct report that you can have that connection with, where it's like, oh, you got my back, it's a beautiful thing. And if you don't hire women because they're women, you're severely missing out on something. So that's kind of my experience when it comes to hiring women and working for women, and being colleagues with women. There's a weird tension or weird energy when it comes to hiring, but I see the gems that they bring to the table, and I see the needle in the haystack, and I hope more people, you know, realize it too in the future.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm gonna go through it because I think one of the things that might surprise you in this is that even if you don't look at a name on a resume, you can, as a recruiter, right? If I took all identifying information off of a resume, I can probably guess which one is a woman's resume and which one's a man's resume,
Really?
because gender roles and gender norms are so ingrained in us as a society. It doesn't mean that some of us don't live outside of those, and as a result that doesn't align, right? But it actually turns out that resumes and how they're written are gender coded a lot of the times, and as a result we pick up on those biases when we read them, and then as a result when we are hired, and also I shouldn't say as a result, and also when we're hiring, if we have a gender in mind for the position, a lot of times the position title is also gender coded. So
Ooh.
I'll talk about this.
Whoa.
So I'll talk about, there's research behind it. There's blind resume reviews that share like this information, and it's why people get screened out, right, for particular reasons. So there's this conversation, and I think you might identify with this too because of the space that you're in. This conversation right now happening on LinkedIn about the techification almost of social media roles, right? So the social media girlies, right, which there are positions that are gender coded, right? When you think of social media and marketing and creative roles, a lot of times those are seen as more like a field that women are in. Human resources is one of them, right? Tech is a more male gender coded field, right? It doesn't mean that's true. It just means that that's like how we think of it, right? Which is why the joke about, oh, the woman came and like, oh, you didn't think she was a doctor, but she was a doctor, right? Like that's how those jokes, which aren't really funny, but they're kind of like happen, right? Because those things are all embedded, right? Fields have almost a gender assigned to them, right? And it actually impacts your earning potential. So we won't go into that. There's other things,
Right,
right?
right.
So if we believe that, like, let's say marketing roles is a woman's kind of job, right? And so as a result, their titles are more like coordinators or managers or things that are softer terms, or coach, whatever, right? But a lot of times it's like social media manager or social media coordinator, right? So what women are seeing right now for social media is that those titles are actually being relabeled something as marketing engineer, social media engineer, right? Engineer is male
Very
coded.
masculine name. Yeah.
And it's almost, yes, it's a very masculine, and it shouldn't be, but that's the truth. So when you have engineer, I haven't seen the data for it yet because it's a new thing that's coming out, right? You're probably more likely to see more men apply for that, which means that that particular organization is trying to place men, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, or trying to hire women that more aligned with a more technical skill set in whatever that is, right? But if you read the job description, is it engineering, or are they just trying to attract males to a woman-centered job typically, right? Let's say a woman-coded job, which doesn't mean that that's reality, right? So I want to share that I'm like calling it this, not because I believe that, but that's because of that, what that dynamic looks like, right?
Hmm.
So if you are hiring for a gender coded job that's for a woman, right, then you are going to look for gender coded language in a job description. And that can work whether it's a woman in a gender coded with a gender coded resume, or a man that just for some reason has a gender coded resume, right? So when you say things, and I say this with love, right? When you were saying like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of skill sets about women that I think are really good. Like they're protective, they're supportive, like they can figure things out. Those are things that are seen as desirable in a woman, but aren't necessarily seen as desirable in a man. And so why is there actually a different evaluation for how we're seeing women who are in the tech space versus men and the skill set they bring, versus we all have the same skill set? Men who are in the tech space, if we have that qualification for women, should also be the same for men. Well, they're protective, they help me out, they figure things out, they're going to communicate with me and talk with me through things and da da da. Well, that should be the same for both genders. But we have actually a different hiring criteria based on how you even explain them, which doesn't mean that they're not qualified and they don't have the hard skills for the job. It just means that we are going to use that as an evaluation tool that is mostly unconscious for most of us, unless we're doing the work in DEI. So when you say women are more critical of women in this space, it's because actually more women are likely probably more aligned to be evaluating a woman based on the norms that we expect from a woman, right? So there's that additional layer. That's an assumption not based on
For
data,
sure.
but all the other things that I've said are based on data. But that is something that I'm going to guess is happening, right? Because we're not just vetting them based on the job. We're vetting them based on how we evaluate that a woman should show up in the workplace and how we're evaluating them. And if they're in a different space, like they're in the tech space, which isn't for women, I could see that that becomes more critical because you're associating and you're evaluating them in a space that they quote unquote shouldn't be based on our biases, right? So I could see that playing out that way because women are more in alignment of understanding the different varying dynamics that we have for women in those spaces, which doesn't make it right, but I do understand why it happens. So yeah, I know that was a
Nice.
lot. Let me know what you want to dive into,
Yeah.
but bias is a lot. And so that's just male, woman, gender, like binary gender. When we go outside of the binary and we look at other sexual orientations or other experiences like neurodivergence or different races and languages and everything else, veteran status. I mean, this becomes a different variety of all of those types of things to consider. So there's just a lot there, but just to just to talk about that one dynamic, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's tough. So would you say, or let me know if this is a fair statement, but like for a female manager interviewing a female candidate, there's like this there's subconscious thought where it's like you're expecting so much more from that female candidate than you are from the male candidate. And you could literally have a situation where maybe that female candidate is a little bit more qualified technically, but because you raised the bar for her and not for him, and he's more closely to the lower bar that you set for him, you're likely gonna hire him. Not because he's actually the better candidate, but because you've put the bar so freaking high for her versus him, where he's just there at the bar that you set.
Yeah, that is my assumption based on my understanding of like how we align with gender roles, right, in the workplace. So I don't want to be as strong as saying that I've seen like a report, like I said, the other things, like I've seen data and report to very much back that up. But based on knowing gender norms and kind of how that's reinforced in the workplace and how we're selected into roles or unselected, so to speak, I would say that is likely what's happening. And that does happen and is a common phenomenon between other minorities as well, right? Like, why do we think that other Black women are harder on us in the workplace? And it's because they have a certain standard based on their experience and what they expect and want to see out of us. And that standard might not be the same for other people outside of our racial group, right? So it depends. I think there's levels to that, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, I can relate because I've had a manager of color, and he was a male. He was actually from the Caribbean, and like this dude was harsh on me. Kind of fast forward. I guess I kind of understand why, right? You're trying to make sure that we look good as a people, but at the same time, without that explanation, it can come off like this dude hates me. So
Yeah.
that's very good. Let's transition into kind of career coaching a little bit and what you do to help people. So you have left corporate America and you are pioneering career coaching and you are literally helping people land in their desired role or opportunity. And the beautiful thing, I can tell already is like you have so much context to what that journey should be like, right? So how
Mhm.
A, how is that working for you? How is career coaching? And then B, what are maybe like one or two things that you kind of as you're doing this career coaching journey, like that kind of gave you an aha moment, like this is the reason why I'm doing this, right? Like now I see why I'm needed here, right? Because so many people are dealing with
Yeah.
X and I'm able to help with Y. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, yes, absolutely. So I think, I mentioned like I started my HR career. Noticed inequities. I launched my coaching business, right? The reason that I launched my coaching business was because I was interviewing a Black woman who I was really excited to hire, right? At the time, I was the only Black woman in the office. I was the only person of color in that office for a while. There were people at like satellite offices and like other places, but I was really the only person, like only the person of color representation in an office setting. And that was really, at the time, I didn't really recognize maybe how much trauma or like,
Mm.
it like challenges that face. But like afterwards, I really like started reflecting on some of the experiences that I had. And it was really challenging to kind of navigate that. But I was in a space where there was another Black woman. I was going to be able to hire her to work with me. And I was super excited. And I interviewed her and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like I'm going to have somebody in it with me. And just very qualified. And she came to her first round interview with, the rest of the organization who was like white males, right? And her interview was like terrible. It was like awful. And I think like it was a lot of the mindset stuff, right? Like she absolutely had the skill set to your point, right? She has the skill set on paper, but what are the other interpersonal things that we need here for qualifications, right? And I don't think that in this case, like we were expecting other, more interpersonal relationships, but she just didn't interview well, and we didn't get an understanding of her skill set.
Hmm.
And I think it was because of nerves, right? And that was actually what propelled me or what led me to create my business. At the time, I'd actually called it HR for Millennials, where I was going to like leverage my HR skills to help other millennials who basically were just like me. They did not have access to the type of career development and resources that I did or that I did not have. I had lots from going to business school and things like that, but workplace navigation and things like that, and showing up to an interview and understanding the dynamics and all of those things were things that I really recognized that other millennials just weren't being taught. And for me, that was because I have a great supportive family, but a lot of them didn't work in these type of corporate settings. They worked in like healthcare or small businesses, and it was just a very different dynamic. And so all of that led me to believe that like I needed to get more of these resources out there for people who maybe didn't have a career center or maybe didn't work in HR and understand how these systems and evaluations or what the reporting requirements and application mean and all of those things, right? Like in between. And so that's how I launched my business. And I think it's, interesting that you're kind of talking about the evolution of that and like how I knew and noticed that like this was a need, because I was talking about like the things that we aren't taught and what we don't really know about writing a resume and interviewing and blah, blah, blah. And then I start working with more Black women and they're sharing their stories and like, right? Because I'm a Black woman. So I'm attracting Black women who want to work with me, right? Because they think I'm going to understand their experience, which I did. But I think I underestimated at the time when I started that, like how much of the differences of experiences, right? I didn't have a framework for DEI and like, inclusive hiring and what diversity, equity, inclusion looks at the workplace and like how that impacts Black women. I just didn't have all those tools at the beginning of when I was doing that. It grew over time, right? And so as I began to work with more Black women, I began to understand the dynamics of how these systems were failing Black women. Then it allowed me to be a much better coach. And so I regard myself as somebody who is trauma informed, so understands like how trauma impacts us in general, but also what that workplace trauma is real,
Yeah.
how we navigate the world like based on that, how we have to show up and we are held to different expectations for based on stereotypes and other biases that show up in the workplace.
Hmm.
And so as a result, that's how my coaching practice ultimately became what it is today, which centers Black woman bliss, which helps people to understand when you talk about like career navigation, understanding next steps, is that a lot of times in these situations, because we have dealt with workplace trauma, because we haven't maybe had somebody to grow and develop us, we don't see ourselves as talented as we are, or we don't see opportunities out there that align with us, and we don't see that it's possible. And so what I love doing is helping Black women to really see themselves and their skill set, really get in touch with like what it is that lights them up, that they get excited to do, and really to pursue the work that is passion driven and that really is, in terms of like a lot of my coaching is around this concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese term meaning the reason for being.
Mm.
So if you want to read the book, there's that. But of course, if you want to work and do the exercise with me, there's that. But it's it's alignment between your skill set and what you love and what the world needs and what you can be paid for. So it's kind of a total alignment with understanding all of those dynamics so that you pick a path that's really fulfilling.
Mm,
So, and a lot of times if you don't, those things are out of alignment. So really helping Black women like truly explore that
mm.
and feel really passionate about what they do and also have the confidence to implement what they've gotten clear on. So yeah, that's what I do.
That's beautiful. First thing, when it comes to DEI, and I like to also make that clear, like DEI is not just about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not just about color, right, or race. It's bigger than that, right? It's also gender, it's also sexual orientation, it's also any type of, I hate to call it a disability, but a disability or an alternative lifestyle, right? DEI was designed to just make sure that we have an inclusive system that everybody feels like they can participate in. I do feel like
Yes.
there has been this perception of DI. It's just like, oh, it's about hiring people of color, and it's way bigger than that. It's diversity and inclusion. So it's to make sure everybody feels part of it. And then the next point I wanted to make is ultimately what you're doing is, sorry, actually before I go to that, workplace trauma, right? It is
Yeah.
100% a real thing. I have seen people
Yes.
get bullied. I have been someone who has been bullied. Workplace trauma could really, I've actually, I'll share with you. I had my first job out of college. I worked for one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the US. They are no longer around because they were naughty. They are a pain management company. I can't say their name here, but they have been in the media a lot. When I went to go work for them, my first job out of college, I felt very bullied. I felt like there was deliberate attempts to poke holes in things just to kind of continuously lower my confidence. That actually ended up putting me in therapy, believe it or not. And
Mm.
that put me in therapy. That caused me to lose a lot of sleep. That actually impacted my relationship I had at the time. It does a lot. And workplace trauma can literally damage people, and people don't even realize that. And I so like that whole like screaming at someone in a meeting, or sending them very aggressive emails, all that stuff, that adds up on a person. Like, and I feel like it has, at least from what I have seen, I feel like that behavior has died out a little bit. And maybe it transitions to more passive aggressive language. But that workplace trauma, even with my wife, I noticed that it really hinders the person. It actually puts that person in a position where they're so afraid to make a mistake that they can't even make a decision. And
Mhm.
when they're not able to make a decision, then the work really, so it's like a cascading effect. The work starts to go down. They're not able to make decisions. They're not confident in their decisions, even though they may have the right answer. And when people feel or sense that confidence, even when you're well, when they sense that lack of confidence, even when you are right, they don't believe you. So then they start to question things,
Mhm.
right? And now you go into a spiral of, now you're being questioned, now you don't have the answers, and it just goes bad. So I appreciate what you're doing in regards to helping people kind of come out of that rut. I don't know what the data is behind that, but I have seen it, and it's a huge problem. I've also seen the after effect, and I have been someone who has been a victim of workplace trauma. So
Mhm.
kudos to you for helping with that. And then the next point I want to make
Thank
was,
you.
you are ultimately taking someone, and you're taking that black woman who you interviewed, you're taking people like her, and you're saying, all right, I'm going to polish you up. I'm going to put you in like a harmony position where we take your skill sets, we take what the world needs, we take what you need, and we're going to come up with a formula, and then we're going to execute on that formula so that way you can be as successful as possible and give the world what they need. Is that fair to say right there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Are there any Now, how do you help manage these clients? Like, are you using any technology to help you do these things? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I was hoping really quickly. I would just want to respond to the workplace trauma really
Yeah,
quick, and then I could talk about the
yeah,
technology. Because I think I was also relating to some of the things that you were saying, right? Like I worked with a toxic supervisor, and although I wasn't yelled or screamed at the workplace, that had like pretty damaging impacts on like my sense of self confidence and like how I was navigating work. And so that trauma is a real thing. That too, likewise, I ended up in therapy. I ended up with actual high functioning depression.
Yep.
I ended up with anxiety.
Yep.
I ended up on prescribed medication, and that ultimately resulted in me having actually an adult ADHD diagnosis because I wasn't able to manage with the stress of all of that, right? And so there are real impacts that workplace trauma and those types of challenges have on us that I think because we're like, well, it's in a professional setting that those things aren't damaging. And it doesn't have to be yelling. We talk about like microaggressions that come up about like doubting your skill set, undermining your decisions, all of those things. And so those microaggressions really compile over time. And I would say one of the things that I think you're talking about and that there's lots of research about is like this idea of psychological safety, and that over time, like in the workplace, those types of experiences like really degrade that. And then you kind of take that energy into other jobs, right? Which is kind of the trauma, right? Like you're reliving and managing and kind of healing from that trauma as you move to other places. So it's really impactful and can be super damaging
Yeah.
to your psyche and for your health and things like that.
Yeah.
So what I would say, go ahead,
Sorry,
sorry.
no, please. I cut you off.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just like, I didn't want to like go too far off on a tangent. But what I was gonna say about, like some of the technology pieces, because I think in this space and time, like we have a lot of challenges in the job market, right? There's a lot of Black women who have been laid off. The job market is not good for
Yeah.
anyone. Oh,
I
go ahead.
saw a crazy number of black women in the last like 12 months. I think it was something over like, I could be wrong, the number could be different now, but the last number I saw was like almost like 500,000 black women have been let go in the last year. 500,000, that is like an entire, that's some larger cities. That's an entire city.
It's massive. The number is massive. Yeah.
That's wild.
Huge. And in spaces that typically have been safer for Black women, like the public space, working for federal government spaces, education, a lot of those spaces are where that is happening, where Black women have kind of seen it more as like a refuge. So yeah, it's a huge, huge challenge, and the layoffs are challenging, and the job market is terrible for everyone. But that does mean that on top of it, that Black women do need more resources and space and time to process that, to create a plan, to have a strategy, to have resources, to have support, right? So that's actually where kind of those technological pieces, let's say, come into the work that I do, because as somebody who has to have my own space and time, I can't coach as many Black women as like need that support. And also coaching, because the time and the investment that goes into that, right, is not always like financially accessible to people. So one of the things that I wanted to do is really provide more access to career culturally responsive for Black women and trauma informed resources for Black women and a community space. So I launched a community, or I relaunched a new version of my community last year, to provide courses and a space for meetups and connections and networking and all of those things for Black women to kind of come together to get those resources, and also to have a training portal that's associated with that growth and development. But I think the part that was really the accessibility for me is that, again, a lot of us who have been laid off, or Black women who have been laid off, do not have the funds, right, to invest in like a career coach or somebody who's going to help them with saying, okay, you don't want to maybe go back into the workforce, maybe you want to launch your business, right? And business coaching is even more financially inaccessible
Yeah.
than career coaching is, right? Because of the return on investment of that time and meeting. So what I wanted to do was to actually create a GPT. I created a bot. Her name is Bliss.
Bliss.
And she is that culturally responsive AI that kind of is like me in AI form. So she's based on my coaching, my training, my systems, my methodology, my framework, all of the things that I kind of talk through and like work clients through in a one-on-one coaching session and in my training portal is all in Bliss. And so she's basically me in a bot
Yeah.
and much more accessible in terms of coaching practices. And so all of the things I'm teaching Black women about, finding your center, your ikigai, figuring out, shifting your mindset, writing a resume, writing a business plan, all of those things are in Bliss, and they're accessible to Black women in the community who are also going through that. So if they have a roadblock, a challenge, something that they need help figuring out, you already have somebody that's accessible all of the time. And I love that that's like, I think, a really great way to use AI.
Mm,
And by the way, because of the systemic issues that Black women face, we actually cannot access the same career development or even sometimes business development resources that others can because we face different barriers, right? So if somebody says, hey, this is the right way to interview, as Black women, we have to know some of the different dynamics that show up for us in interviews and how to navigate those, right? Like, what does it feel like to think, this happens with Black women all the time, should I take my education off of my resume? I keep getting feedback that I'm overqualified. Isn't that a wild thing to experience? You're in this job market, you haven't had a job for 6 months to a year, you go to an interview and they tell you that you're overqualified and you just need a job. So what is the culturally responsive guidance in this, right? Because most people are like, put your degree on there, right? And in some, and I don't like, I want Black women to really think about it before they do that. Like, are they in a space where they really need that job? Because if you do detract your skill set and you underplay your skills, when you get into the job market, then you get into the job, then you're a target because you're overqualified and you're going to outperform other people, right? So then that becomes a challenge of you removing it. But if it's on there, then you know, and they're screening you out, that's a challenge that you're being screening out, but you're not going to get into a workplace that's toxic because you're a highly qualified, highly educated Black woman. You might have other issues, but it's not going to be the education part, right? And you're not going to find that nuance somewhere else, right? You're only going to find that with working and speaking to other Black women who have experienced the same thing. And you might make the same decision. You might say, I'm going to keep the education on there or I'm not. But knowing why and feeling like you're making an empowering decision based on that is not something that you're going to get outside of that, that you won't find on YouTube from most career coaches or most people who are not Black women, or at least frequently coach Black women and understand the dynamics. I think that if you have AI and accessible and you can know that your AI understands the different dynamics that Black women face, then that's going to help you make better decisions and also at a more affordable rate so you can actually get the support that you need. So yeah, that's all the technology, all the stack
yeah,
that I've got for Black women in my community. And it's been really great to see Bliss out there doing big things.
that is so beautiful that you've literally tailored a bot to speak to a specific type of user. And I think that's great because I'm sure the responses, the guidance, it's going to be catered to that type of user who happens to be a Black woman. So I think that's beautiful. Furthermore, I've been having, so part of the reason why I started this podcast too is to have this type of dialogue because I feel like, and here's my thing. I feel like the inevitable is coming, right? Which is because of technology advancement, we're going to start to see a lot more changes, a lot more shifts, layoffs. But at the same time, I feel like we should take a step back and say, how do we turn this into an opportunity? Because this could be an opportunity for us to significantly shift wealth. This could be an opportunity for us to get ahead. We just have to figure that out. And part of what I want to do on this podcast is to kind of start thinking about and solving problems that are not happening necessarily today, but that are going to be here in about 3 to 5 years. So let's go after and start having conversations about things that don't even exist yet. I think what you're doing is super progressive, but I feel like you're going to see probably a huge pop in about 2 to 3 years ish because you're going to see people flocking to you in droves because of the help that they're going to need. And I could even see a situation where your business kind of also pivots because it goes from just career coaching to like now I'm business coaching, right? Because now we're going to start to see, 500,000 women is just that's just the start of it, right? But that's a large number. And 500,000 women with the job market it is now, and someone's going to say, you know what? I'm not going back into work. Someone is going to say, I just need to start my own business, but I would love to talk with a coach who gets me and can kind of talk my language because you know what? I can't be talked to a certain way or I can't be advised a certain way. I need to be advised. It's very natural for humans to want to connect. It's very natural for humans to want to be like around people who are like themselves. I feel like you're going to probably attract that audience in the next like 2 to 3 years. So don't be surprised and get ready for that. But I also think with what you are doing, and this kind of goes back to the workplace trauma, helping people unpack that and work through that is also probably going to be very rewarding to you because I'm telling you, like that workplace trauma, unless you've healed from it, it doesn't go away. It like you said, it does follow you.
Mhm.
Some people don't even know how to heal from it. But even going back even further, and I wanted to mention this, but I didn't want to cut you off too. I think a lot of
Yeah.
this, believe it or not, it stems from childhood development.
Mhm.
Particularly people of color. You know, you grow up in a house where you're not allowed to question anything your parents say. You do what I tell you to do, and there's not a lot of dialogue or explanation as to why your parents are telling you to do this, why you're told to do this. So you kind of grow up in life, and you kind of go through life with like having this understanding for what authority looks like. And when you get into the workplace as a young person, this is your first time being around people who are your equals. They're not necessarily your authority
Mhm.
anymore. So when you come into a conflict with Tim or John at work, because Tim and John are older than you, or you perceive them as like, you know, your parents' age, you're not going to necessarily resist or fight back or challenge them. You're just going to do whatever it is they say. And I think that is where some of the issues start from a workplace trauma
Mhm.
perspective. It even happened to me, right? Like it's like, you don't need to ask me why I say do it. Just do what I say. So like all those things, you're taught that since youth, it follows you into your career. Then you're now put in a position where you have to make decisions and you should push back, but you don't know how to do that.
Mhm.
So I've actually been making conscious decisions on my side to explain to my kids, don't do that because you might or this may happen. So that way that they understand and they feel comfortable asking questions because I don't want to put my kids in a situation where it's like, just shut your mouth, do what I say to do, and now you're silent and then you go through life just being silent and someone tells you to do something
Mhm.
and like I heard this thing on the Breakfast Club too, where one of the challenges that parents will face is one day if you keep silencing your kid and you tell them like just do what I say, they're gonna run into someone who they look up to in high school who's gonna say, "Hey, let's skip school, let's go do drugs." They're not gonna question or challenge that. They're just going to go with the flow. So I
Mhm.
even at work, Tim is saying change all these numbers in this accounting sheet to zero, which is fraud, and you're not gonna challenge it.
You're going to
Well, we're
jail.
going to
You're
jail
going to jail with
because I
Tim.
never learned.
You and
I
Tim.
never learned how to challenge anything. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah, that's a good example.
yeah, I feel like your program is definitely going to help a lot of that. What would you say do you think is going to be like the biggest challenge for women in the next, 2 to 5 years? If you
Yeah,
have you
I'm
seen a
really
trend or are you noticing things that are like,
oh my gosh. You're probably gonna regret asking me this because I'm gonna want to go on and on and on. No, I'm just joking. So the interesting thing that I've really been sharing lately is that like I created this entire system and these tools at the beginning of 2025 because at the end of 2024 definitely I didn't know that like this would be the impact of DEI being rolled back, but I had some sneaky suspicions that things like as opportunity black women and the systems that DEI had set up were going to be those, so a lot of those things were going to be taken away, and they were. I really didn't think it was going to be that much, right? So that's when I actually made that commitment to doing this, to reevaluating that at tail end of 2024. But the reality is that this trend for Black women wanting to, now a lot of us have been pushed out, right? That number is massive. But a lot of Black women, because of the workplace trauma, we're not seeing the workplace as something that's truly sustainable for them and wanting to explore what those other opportunities were, very much like myself. So I actually saw an uptick of Black women who were my career coaching clients asking me about business coaching client, about to be a
yeah,
business coaching client, because they were seeing those same dynamics where they just didn't want to challenge, they didn't want to deal with the challenges of that anymore, right? And so I say that like that's all of that has been a natural progression and trend because I have talked with so many black women who are navigating this. So I also have similar, thoughts about what this is going to look like, and I have a name for it actually. I know. I'll have to send you the video. And I call it the great bounce back, right? So there is going to be, right? We've already seen the challenges that this type of political and cultural like environment has caused for us from a socio-economic standpoint, right? I won't get into the details, but we know that's what it looks like. I can walk down the street and look at the gas pump to know what that looks like, okay? It's in front of us and we know what that looks like, right? This, if it continues, we're either going to see the complete decline of our country or we're going to see a bounce back, right? Which means that it's going to be this period of time And I think we saw it the opposite way, right? We saw more progressive political beliefs come in and want to change, and we had hope for a future, right? And because there was a backlash of having a black president, right? We started this kind of backlash, right? But there's a lot of reason to believe that a lot of that, the backlash, or the kind of like go 50 steps backwards because we were making 3 steps forward, usually, I can't remember, I think it's called like the expiration theory or something like that, where when things are dying out, or extinction theory or something, when things are dying out, it kind of have this large wave that puts you back, and then you still continue going forward. And so that is what I see from all of the progressive spaces and the things that have happened for those of us, particularly in the DEI space. So I think we have gone so many years back in terms of progression and what we've seen, but I think that there's going to be a port where we got to go back because things are breaking down. And what I do know, whether or not the workplace wants to admit it or not, that Black women, because of stereotypes, right, are often seen as the individuals that are the foundation, the backbone, the support, the people that are taking care of everything, right? So what happens when those support roles, those Black women, are laid off or terminated because AI can do it, right? You don't have the support roles. This is going to go full circle, in my humble opinion, where the support needs are not going to be met, but Black women in that time have been pushed out and not able to get a job. And so they are going to have figured it out, right? They're going to have to figure out whether it's they launch the business, they do contract, they do freelance, whatever. They figured out how to travel the world on little to no funds, right? Like the girlies who do the travel. And so there's going to be all of these opportunities to become a creatorpreneur and to create your own business and be your own brand, so to speak. Think of you, whether you have a full business or not, but to think of yourself like a
Yes.
business. And that means that the power that employers have right now is not going to be there, right? They will not have any reason for Black women and other women who have been in support roles, or other people who have since created their business, right? It's not just Black women. Though that employment market is not going to be there anymore. And as a result, then they're going to have to work with individuals like they would a
Yeah.
business, instead of like they would be employees. And then the power dynamic has shifted, right?
Yeah.
So same thing for me, right? You want me to come in and do HR and consult with you, and do DEI and consult with you, and do trainings? Well, that's a lot more expensive than me being on your payroll, actually, because I'm my own
Yeah.
business. And as a result, you're going to pay for that. And it's because I didn't see this as something that aligned with what I wanted. Like, I didn't want to be stuck at my desk all day and deal with microaggressions and a toxic boss and fickle leadership teams and people who wanted to discriminate and like make judgments and do a PIP that's not really a PIP because they wanted to control me or push me out or what, all of the things,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to deal with that. So now, instead of that, you can fill out my invoice and I can show up according to my terms and pay and responsibilities, and don't worry about it. I know what I put in my retirement account this month, and it's not dependent on you, and I have my own benefits, and you can't turn it off when I leave.
Yeah. That is the ultimate clapback. That is like
And that's what the great
that
bounce
is
back
the
is.
ultimate
That's what I want for
bang
us.
bang.
Pay the
Pay the,
invoice.
no,
Here it
don't
is.
pay me.
I'm free.
Don't pay me. Pay my
Yeah.
invoice.
5 years. I'm hoping we'll be there in five
No.
years. But I don't know. But that's my
Net
vision,
terms
right? And that's what I
15.
want for
Net
us.
terms 15, please.
Yeah, exactly. And you better pay me. Yeah.
That I agree. I feel like, oh, I'm gonna I'll go back to the DEI thing, but I feel like
Sure.
with there is going to be some sort of course correction that happens, right? The universe is going to course correct. I With all the changes that are happening because of AI, there's mass layoffs, etc., right? You got to remember, it's better to have people working than not working, right? When you don't have
Yeah.
people working,
We hope.
well, yeah, it's because here's the thing. Fine, you have zero people working. Well, now what do you do? Because now you just destabilize your economy. What good is it if I'm a billionaire sitting on wealth if I can't buy it? I have all this money, but I can't buy anything because there's nobody to make it, right?
Mm.
Or there's nobody here who wants to give me the service. So now does your billion actually mean a billion anymore? So I have had these thoughts in my mind where people are like, "Oh my gosh, AI is going to take all the jobs. AI is going to do all this. AI is going to do a lot of things." But I also feel like you got to remember there's going to be a zero barrier moment where it's like, okay, AI has maybe gone a little too far, and it's
Mm-hmm.
actually now starting to hinder things. One example of where I feel like people are already starting to kind of feel the fatigue or kind of rebel back against AI is like with social media posts. Social
Mm-hmm.
media posts, you now have a tool and a feature, and even in your corporate emails. I'll go to corporate emails because that's more relatable first. I use Gemini. I use Google to help me polish my emails, but when I polish, I'm like, I don't talk. They know this ain't me. Like I'm just so like
That's too
they know I
good.
don't say greetings. Who is this guy?
You got to build a bot that sounds like
I
you,
do.
James. That's what. No,
I
I'm
do.
just
I do have to
kidding.
spend more time with the bot and train it to sound like me. But it's just interesting, like, even when I look on Facebook and like you look at comments, you're like, dude, you barely spell Mississippi right. Like I know you didn't right. So and I've also seen people say like I'm really is anybody here actually human because it seems like this is all polished information. So I think people are starting to see that. And one of the things I also talked about too, like where I feel like there's gonna be another ripple or AI fatigue is like in dating, right? More people are
Mm,
dating online or finding their partners online. I forgot what the number looked like, but it's a significant amount. I think we're not at majority yet, but I think we're trickling there. But could you imagine if we meet on a dating app and then your partner is sending you all these sweet, like, awesome, amazing messages, but it's all like with the essence is that going to impact dating life? Are we going to need to create some sort of guardrails to say, hey, or some sort of feature that kind of picks up if this is AI written or not, right? Because we want the authentic person to show up all the time. But now, if we're
mhm,
using things like AI, is the authentic person actually showing up? And are we overusing AI? So I think that's when we're going to start to see things kind of bubble up a little bit, and there's going to be the correction. And I think also because of where I work, so I work in tech, and my whole job, funny enough, is to create service features that allow you to do things on your own without needing to speak with an agent or speak with a human. However,
mhm,
I am also noticing that people do appreciate speaking to a human. We have had situations where no matter how well the feature we doesn't matter. There's this innate feeling of like I need to connect with someone who understands me. Right? I need to vent. I need to express this frustration that I'm having. People are gonna want that in the future. They're not gonna want to be overbought. One last example I'll give you is there is a restaurant, a sushi restaurant nearby that actually has robots deliver food to your
mhm.
table. And I was trying to convince my wife to want to go there, and she's like, "No, like I kind of want to see the server. I need to see." So it's like, interesting. See, for me, I don't care how the food is brought. I don't care. But like for her, it's a little bit more. I
Yeah.
need that human approach. So I think we'll see a point where people are like, screw it. We got to go back to the old ways. However, like Fat Joe said, today's price is not yesterday's price. Once that happens, especially with
Yeah.
black women, you're gonna see them be a premium. And I think I've even mentioned this before too on a different episode. People are gonna become a premium in the future. Like this whole like we're gonna be machines and AI driven, etc. People are going to become a premium, and there's going to be a business out there that figures out how to do things efficiently with humans, and they are going to thrive. I also feel like there's going to be this continued push, and I pray it continues to happen for people to become entrepreneurs. I think the world is so
Mhm,
much better when people are entrepreneurs and everybody's finding out their own niche, their own way to make money, their own value that they can bring. And I think those people are going to be phenomenal. So I wanted to say that. And then I wanted to also go back to DEI, the rollbacks that we did here. Okay. Was this data driven? Like how did we make the decision that said this system does not work anymore? Like was there an analysis done? Was there just nope, it's not anymore? Like why did we roll back DEI? Do you have any insight on that by chance?
So I feel like it's hard to talk to just answer the question. I'm gonna try, right? Because I think that right, like why did DEI propel forward so quickly, right? The happenings of 2020 where there was social pressure, and that pressure was so great that I think there was economic value placed on that, right? Like there were real economic impacts for organizations that didn't choose to align with DEI post, I don't know, censoring, so unaliving of George Floyd, right? So when that social movement happened, I think the financial movement went with it too, right? And it's when we started seeing Walmart do weird things like have Juneteenth ice cream, right? Like, I don't know
That
if you
shit
saw
was
that.
weird,
Okay,
bro.
do you
I was
remember
like,
that?
what?
It was
Cringy as
weird.
fuck.
It was weird,
That's
right?
super cringy.
But it shows me it was weird, but it told me that that social movement, like the money went with it, right?
Yeah.
So when we see what happened with DEI, right, which from an organizational standpoint, what happened to DEI is that financial benefit became less and less because the, let's say,
Hmm.
legal, political risk went up. It neutralize the financial benefit of being pro DEI. Let's say that, right? And so I think as a result, organizations didn't look at it suddenly in 2025 and say, "Oh, it wasn't profitable this whole time." Geez, can't believe we've been doing this for 5 years. That's not what happened. What happened is that because our political and our cultural norms changed around whether this was an acceptable practice or not based on our political context and how that changed, that meant that it was more profitable for them to mitigate the financial and societal risks that were associated with that. So what that looks like is, so I worked in higher education when this whole thing was happening, right? So about every 3 months, we would have an audit of everything in the entire university, every training, every piece of article. And that didn't even mean if it was students, it could be employees, right? Why was that happening? And of course, what was the financial and administrative load of that from a like fiscal standpoint? I don't even want to think about that because that's all of Florida and all public organizations in Florida.
Mm.
Sorry, I'm going on a tangent. That being said, it's a rant for sure. That being said, every public organization was going through all of their content to eliminate things that were not in alignment with orders that were coming out from our governor's office or whatever. I can't remember. Some of them were being pushed through, the legislative branches and stuff, whatever. I'm not getting into Florida political, and I don't even remember most of it at the time. I knew it a lot better when I was in that spaces. But anyway, there were orders that were coming through that were impacting any public employers, which meant, well, you can't teach about critical race theory, you can't teach things about gender, can't be in any of your languages because we're not indoctrinating children, right? And blah 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 blah, all of the things, right? That today, right now, right, we just put under the cloak of like wokeism, right, and how they're challenging that, right?
Okay.
So what that meant is that every single time a new executive order came out, like challenging something, we had to dim, so much so that at some point eventually all of the DEI offices pretty much in Florida were eliminated, right? Just from legislation, which meant it had nothing to do with the organizations evaluating whether this was beneficial, economic, productive, right? Even though there's tons of research and data that shows that diversity, equity, inclusion practices do increase productivity, right? Now, there's issues with performative DEI that don't do that, but that's another story, right? But DEI practices that actually increase diversity leads to greater economic outcomes, right?
Absolutely.
So what it was is that, well, I can continue doing DEI and get the benefits of diversity and see the benefits of that and also have the social benefits of those who are progressive or liberal or whatever. Or I can pay the fines and deal with legislation and have to like navigate what's in and what's out, what's legal, what's not, what's going to get me sued, what's going to be not. And that financial risk was too high. And if they weren't really about it in the first place, the Walmarts who were making performative ice cream weren't about it. Okay. But the organizations that were actually committed and understood that this was important continued doing it because they understood that they were more committed to it, right? So those are the organizations that haven't appealed it because they have seen the benefits for them. It's the organizations that were never committed in the first place and were only doing it for whatever clout you want to say society wise that they were getting, or the financial impacts, right? Or the financial benefits of diversity. But when the social political climate change, so did their risk evaluation of that. So it didn't necessarily have to do with the practices or abandoning it, rather the social capital of it, I guess is what you want to say.
Gotcha. And what a shame.
That's my
No, no,
take.
that's a
That's
great
my
take.
take.
What a shame because I worked for I won't say their name, but I worked for a telecom company that is also I also use in Florida. They start with an S, and I remember when I worked in the customer experience there, and when part of our role was to work on like communications to customers, right? Here's an example of why it is important to have diversity. Because all of our emails, all of our communications were as if I was talking to, they were written as if I'm talking to a 6'2" white male. Okay. Our customers do not reflect the communications you're sending them. And you've put a department together that doesn't have diversity. So therefore the communication to the customer doesn't even look like it's diverse. And you have a wide range of customers throughout the country, yet you can't connect with them. And then you look at companies like T-Mobile who, okay, fine, like we've dumped on T-Mobile for a long time and made fun of them, but like they get it. Everything about them shows color and diversity and difference. And I'm just calling this out to say, like, this is an example of why diversity and inclusion is important. So you can wipe out DEI all you want and
Mhm.
all this other stuff. As you continue to do that, remember, if that's what you want to do, it's going to also show up with your customers. And if you feel like, hey, I want to be very generic. I don't want to have DEI on my business, then you're kind of missing on a huge economic opportunity. And I feel like
Mhm.
as people become more conscious of this, they're going to also start making it. I mean, we already saw it with Target, right? When Target started to do their shenanigans,
Mhm.
people were. I think the CEO had to leave the company. Like, that's how big of a hit it was. Like, nobody talks about that. Like, nobody talks about the economic power that diversity has, right? If
Mhm.
you put diversity together to make a fist, they can really make some changes. So I'm hoping that people who are here, and I say all that to the people that hear this, like really think about who you are buying from, where you are shopping. I know this is off tangent, but like think about how they perceive you as a customer and what do things look like internally. Now I get it, right? Some places they just have the product that you need because of X, Y, and Z, and that's fair. You have to do what you have to do, but always have that mindset of like, well, do they hire people like me at this company? Because if they don't, then why should I buy their product, right? But yeah, I just wanted to get an understanding of why we decided to roll back DEI, and then also thing you mentioned too. You worked in higher education. My wife also worked in higher education. She worked at Boston College. That is where I think
Mhm.
her first like real traumatic experience happened. I don't know what's happening at these universities. What's going on?
Higher education is not for people who aren't about it. I'll just
Yeah, it's
put it that
something
way.
something crazy.
Yeah.
I know we're at time now, so I did want to wrap this up. But what I wanted to do too is just make sure that the audience who's listening, if they needed to find you, if they wanted to reach out to you, if they wanted to reach out to your service. And one thing I wanted to just also clarify, is your service specifically for women of color, or is it open for anybody who's looking for career assistance?
Really great question. So, yes, my name is Mercedes Swan. You type it in Mercedes like the car, last name like the bird, and you're going to find me on literally almost any platform except the ones that are probably don't want to be on as a Black woman. But that being said, I'm on pretty much all of them. So you can find me and connect with me there. And yes, I am specifically a coach for Black women. So my spaces that I create, like the community space where I want Black women to be able to show up authentically in that space, I do want to keep that space safe for us, right? But in terms of one on one coaching or consulting, training, speaking, all of those things, I have worked with clients from all different racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, veterans, other protected statuses, age, broad range of ages. So I do think that in terms of having that DEI lens and understanding the differences and experiences and what we need based on where we are and what we're navigating, that's absolutely something that I do as a coach. So yes, I do really focus on my services and coaching and everything like that on Black women, but I have many clients who are outside of that space as well. And so there's a variety of ways to work with me from in that space. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will encourage everyone who's listening to please reach out to Mercedes. Remember the spelling. You can search her on Google. She'll come up, and I'll also put some links to her on this episode. So, Mercedes, thank you again for coming out. We appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
You're awesome. 1 second. Okay.